Hey folks, Papa Boris here, reviewing the first of the 5 games of the World Leader Circuit Masters 300 First Edition, a very fancily named tournament indeed. This was, as luck would have it, against Ript0r. So my first game of this tournament was against the same opponent as my last game of the last tournament. That game I thought was the best game of the tournament, and this one might be as well. Obviously, since it's only the first of 5, I can't call it yet, but this was a really good game, so something about Ript0r's style really works with my style to create exciting games, and again, without spoiling the outcome, of course. So my opponent got the first ban. By the way, if you're not familiar with expert mode, there's a round of bans before the first player drafts, and there's a round of bans after the first player drafts their second piece. So Ript0r gets rid of the Hermit and Cub. I guess that's what this really strong opponent did not want me taking with my first pick. I got rid of the Acrobat because Ript0r just crushed me with it, and because that seems to be a weakness of mine, so I thought, not knowing what else to do, I might as well get rid of a strong character that I seem to be particularly challenged playing against. And then I decided just to be a Dumbo and take the Royal Guard. You know, it's a strong character, gets up there, very flexible, good stuff, lots of mobility. You can use the active power to touch the enemy leader, all that good stuff. So I thought, you know what, hell, let's just see what happens. Now here is Ript0r's response. He moves up and he grabs the Illusionist and the Vizier, which I was actually kind of surprised by. I wasn't expecting the Vizier as a first round pick, but maybe this guy likes the Vizier even more than I do. And then the Illusionist right here is really smart placement. It means that if I move my leader up, spawn the Royal Guard here, and put the Royal Guard there, yes, I am experimenting with annotation in this game, then the Illusionist can swap with my Royal Guard. And then my Royal Guard, of course, can teleport back in, but what I decided was better than all of that is to just do a small hop. And my opponent can, of course, in that case, still put his leader here and then still swap with the Illusionist, but then his leader is over here. So his Illusionist ends up being here no matter what, but I'd rather have his leader over here in the side than my Royal Guard here on the side and the leader in the center. Because a leader in the center with a Vizier is a very annoying thing to have to deal with. Because then it can just go in one direction and you go over, and then it goes in the other direction and then you're out of position. So I always try when my opponent has a Vizier to pin their leader off to the side. So I thought that even delaying my own development a little bit and not getting quite as far forward as I could be was worth it in order for my opponent's leader to end up on the side of the board, at least for the time being. So that was my thinking. I kept my leader where he was, and then I grabbed the Claw. This is an opening I will go on to use multiple times. I hate to say the word opening. I don't think it's great for the long-term health of the game, but I do think that's inevitably what's going to happen with a mode like this. So the thinking, of course, here is that my Royal Guard moves, my Claw pulls up to this beautiful centralized position, and then I can actually draft a piece here, here, or here, and pull them up with the Claw on the following turn, getting a lot of pieces in the middle. So that was my plan. And after that, we have the second round of bans. Again, the first round of bans happens before the first player takes the first piece, and the second round happens after the first player takes their second piece. And that's it. There's no more banning. So each player bans just 2 characters, and after that, no more bans. So Ript0r makes an interesting choice. He bans the Jailer. And for me then, that made it very clear I needed to ban the Bruiser, because I didn't really want to take the Bruiser myself. And sorry, that's not the right thing. My opponent's getting the next draft. So I wanted the Bruiser if the Jailer's not going to be in the game, but I wasn't getting the next draft. My opponent was, and I didn't want my opponent taking the Bruiser with the Jailer being gone. Of course, I could still take the Protector, right? So that is a way that I could have then countered the Bruiser, and it would have had some beneficial impact against the Illusionist as well, but I just didn't feel like doing that. I wanted to be aggressive, so I got rid of the Bruiser. All right, so my opponent does what I expected. He steps up with the leader, he swaps, he moves the Vizier, and then he makes a really shocking pick here. You know, obviously I was thinking Wanderer, I was thinking Rider, maybe Brewmaster to go with the Illusionist, but he actually chose the Assassin. So maybe I'm undervaluing the Assassin. Maybe me just casually thinking the Assassin's a brick is wrong, because, you know, the designer of the game drafted the Assassin pretty highly, and then now this player with everything to choose from is taking the Assassin. I mean, it's not like he's going to be pulling any punches, doing me any favors. But Ript0r's plan is pretty clear here. So he, of course, is planning to swap the Illusionist with the Assassin. So he's got his own kind of opening going on here. And then the Assassin's a little bit far forward and ready to try to, swoop around and cut my leader off. Now, maybe what he was afraid of was me doing the same thing, right? I could have also, it was been impossible for him to really stop it. I could have also clawed up and then pulled the Assassin up and tried to do some shenanigans. Maybe he was afraid of that. But in any case, he grabs the Assassin, which I don't mind too much because You know, it's not a very mobile piece, and he already has the Vizier, which is not a super mobile piece. Obviously, it makes the leader mobile, but the Vizier himself is not mobile. So I liked my chances because I had two very aggressive pieces, it felt like. Here, I just move my Royal Guard towards his leader, I claw up to the middle, and then what piece do I take next? There's some decent options. You could take the Wanderer. The Wanderer is obviously a pretty good piece. You could take the Archer to have some range if you want. You could take the Rider for some mobility, but I decide to grab the Brewmaster here, because the Brewmaster with the Claw can be really dangerous. There can be missed tactics, and the Brewmaster in general, even with vanilla pieces, can be quite strong. So my opponent decides to swap with the Assassin, of course, then moves the Assassin in, moves the Vizier in, and then just kind of keeps the leader here. He could have put the leader back all the way this way. That would have been safe, but maybe he just didn't want to commit to that. Maybe he wanted to not block the Illusionist line of sight. I mean, obviously, he can then move the leader and go in anyways. I'm not exactly sure why he didn't want to go here. This, to me, feels like a safer square than this one. But in any case, he decides to go here. And then for his final recruit, he grabs the Manipulator, which I was again surprised by. I think of the Manipulator as sort of a brick, and the Wanderer is still here. That's almost certainly what I would have taken in this case. But I guess maybe I'm undervaluing characters like the Assassin and the Manipulator. So now the Manipulator is X-raying all my characters, and this is a puzzle. It doesn't have a correct solution. But take your time and think about what you would do in this situation and why. There's really just like a ton of different moves that you could make. You could obviously move up the Royal Guard, claw up to the Manipulator here, and have two characters very, very close to the enemy leader, and then just start walking with the Brewmaster. The thing I don't like about that is just one thing only, and that's that my opponent has the Vizier, and his leader can just zip out here, and then I got absolutely nothing going on. I'm like the opposite of Stacy's mom at that point. So I didn't like that move too much. Another thing to consider is that the Manipulator can move the Claw, and the Illusionist might swap with the Claw, and so leaving the Claw here is not maybe that great. So you could try a move like putting the Royal Guard here to stop the... Oh, I beg your pardon, someone's calling me. All right, spam call. So I could put the Royal Guard here. That stops the Manipulator. I could then move the Claw here to get out of the Illusionist's way, and then move up the Brewmaster this way. It's sort of similar to the other move, except instead of the Royal Guard being here, it's over here, blocking the Manipulator. Again, I still don't like the fact that the leader can just zip out, and then my own leader can't really go here to respawn the Royal Guard close to the leader, because the Assassin's a little bit dangerous here, and obviously I can't stay too close to the Assassin. So what I decided to do is pull up the Brewmaster with my Claw to block the Assassin, and then just actually leave the Claw here. I could, of course, at that point also kick the Claw, but I decided, you know what, F it. If you want to spend your turn kicking my Claw or whatever, that's fine. And I also decided to go a little bit crazy and actually step up with the Royal Guard to the leader. So my thinking was to just go pure aggro with this move. I step up, I pull up the Brewmaster, I even don't block the Assassin, I walk the Brewmaster around. So I'm willing to let all of my opponent's pieces just sort of come at me in exchange for getting very close to his leader, and then also making it difficult, bordering on impossible, for his leader to zip out the other way. And I don't necessarily think this is wrong. I think it's obviously if there was like an AlphaGo engine here who could calculate this was probably either winning or losing. And it's hard for a human at this point to tell which, because there's so many complicated tactics. But I decided to go for it because, as we've seen, I'm not super great at the long strategic games. So I thought that it would be better to just have it out and either win or lose because of pure aggression. However, I follow this up with a cataclysmic blunder in the drafting stage. And it's one of those things that's just so bad. It's like, there's a visceral part of my body that makes me not want to review this game because of just how bad this next drafting choice is. But we have to embrace these mistakes. The pain of the mistakes must motivate us to teach us how to do better in the future. What I do is I draft the Rider over here in the corner. Now, my thinking with that was that the Rider can go this way and my opponent can't stop this. And that makes it really, really hard for my opponent to cut back with the leader. Going over here seems like it's difficult because the Claw is there to cut it off. Now, the reason it's a mistake is because the Wanderer can also teleport to this space, unless, of course, like the Assassin pulls back or something crazy like that. The Wanderer can also go to a lot of spaces. Now, I was being greedy here because after the Wanderer lands, the Wanderer is a vanilla piece. In order for the Wanderer to touch the enemy leader, it just has to move normally. Whereas the Rider can move next to the enemy leader with its active ability, and I wanted that long-term threat potential. But my opponent found a way to punish this move horribly. Pause a second. Here's a puzzle, and see if you can figure out what my opponent noticed that I missed. All right, this was absolutely jaw-dropping. What my opponent did, which I totally did not expect, is he did the swap with the Claw and the Illusionist, but he zipped his leader up this way. And now, with the Illusionist swapping the Claw, my Claw is actually out of position. The Manipulator steps forward. There is now nothing for the Claw to latch onto to get next to the enemy leader, so it's, at least a couple of turns out of position to get there. And he can even move the Assassin up. Look at this horrifying situation. He has all these pieces just barreling down towards my completely undefended leader. And in particular, my Rider is totally out of position. The icing on the cake here is that the Rider can't even go in the most direct path towards the enemy leader because, of course, I drafted it here in the corner where it's directly blocked by the Assassin's most natural move. Now, if this had been a Wanderer, it could have just jumped in here, and then my opponent probably could not stop checkmate. I mean, I can get away from these pieces. There's no mobile pieces here except for the leader, so I could just step away for like a turn and survive, and I think that, with the Wanderer here, the Claw here, the Brewmaster is a bit irrelevant, and the Royal Guard, I think my opponent can't stop checkmate, so my opponent wouldn't have made this move. Wanderer over here would have stopped this entire sequence from the other side of the board, such is the power of the Wanderer, but because it's the Rider instead, I think basically here I am just toast. But okay, there's still some way to be resilient and some ways to be less resilient than others. So again, everything is critical, every single position. Pause here, see if you can solve the puzzle of what move is best for the black pieces. So the real question is what to do with the Claw, because I think some of the pieces have pretty obvious moves, right? The Rider really can't do much except, go this way, try to get around to the leader from the bottom. My leader has to step away to stop the checkmate, but what do I do with the Claw? So you can go here and just walk towards the leader. You can pull the Illusionist up, or you can pull yourself up to the Illusionist. So there's three main things that you can do. Either move yourself there or pull the Illusionist back for protection. I really wanted to pull the Illusionist back because, at this point, a little bit of defense seems like it could go a long way. But what I really didn't like about the pulling the Illusionist back move is that my opponent can then take a really, really aggressive line. He can basically just, push up everything other than the Illusionist. And I just don't have checkmate here after his leader steps up as well. And then I can't stop checkmate. And then it doesn't matter that he doesn't have the Illusionist. So I could be miscalculating. You should check everything I'm saying because it's really, really hard to calculate, but I just didn't think I could survive at that point. So what I decided to do was threaten checkmate by pulling up. This square felt better to be on than this one because my last move is then to move the Brewmaster there, and I felt like having the Brewmaster next to the Claw was better than just having the Claw here off by itself where it can't even pull up the Brewmaster for any synergy. I mean, I could have moved the Brewmaster there, and then had the option to maybe pull it up, but still, it's very limited. It's just pulling up the Brewmaster, and then the Brewmaster can kick it, but it can also just already move. So it wasn't really adding anything to have the Brewmaster within Claw range. Having the Brewmaster already starting the turn next to the Claw seemed a lot better. Then we have the agonizing decision of where to put the Royal Guard. I really wanted to leave the Royal Guard here to stop any other pieces from going here. The problem is that there's just this one particular move that I couldn't see a good way to deal with. It's, again, very, very aggressive. You move the Manipulator down, you move the Illusionist in, you move the Assassin in, and the leader just tucks away here, and the Vizier steps back for defense. At this point, what's really maddening is that my Claw can land here by pulling up, or by being Brewmaster kicked. My Royal Guard can get in here by teleportation, but that's it. There's no other way for me to get a piece touching the enemy leader. I have two different pieces that can go to this one space, but no two pieces can go to two different spaces for the win. So what I decided to do is I move the Royal Guard one space over. Now if my opponent tries that line, the Royal Guard can step in here and the Claw can hook in for checkmate. So that particular extremely aggressive advance is ruled out, and I was hoping that with this line, my opponent would have to reserve two pieces for defense, thus buying me another turn. Although, again, I still didn't see how I was actually going to win the game. I think my opponent just has this one from this position. But that felt like the most resilient defense. And as for the teleport here, step up move with the Royal Guard, that just felt like I was cashing out my summon, and that if my opponent ever found a way to zip backwards, while having enough protection to not get checkmated by just my 2 pieces, which seemed like it should be possible, then it was all over at that point, because then the leader was wildly out of position, and I could not resummon the Royal Guard to be near his leader, because my leader was never going to get out of the side of the board. So I wanted to reserve the teleportation for the last possible moment. All right, so now it's my opponent's turn, and I think he's got this game in the bag, but I catch a bit of a lucky break. He, for some reason, puts the assassin there instead of here. Maybe he was worried about the claw pulling up the assassin, but if I do that, I just basically am too passive, and even with, you know, the Brewmaster still being to give my claw launcher a move, so to speak, I think I still just lose the game. I could be wrong about this, but in any case, as we'll see, this decision to put the assassin here instead of here ends up being very, very significant. Now, he does, of course, need to tend to the fact that I am technically threatening checkmate. He does that by moving up the manipulator, moving the leader over here to the side, and then putting the vizier there for defense. Now, he now also has to put the illusionist in a somewhat defensive posture to stop the claw launcher from being able to get to the square while the Royal Guard gets to this one. By the way, one thing I liked about my previous move is that with a piece here and here, this square is illegal for his leader to step into, so there was no way that he would ever be able to zip back. All right, and so now it's my turn. Take a moment, pause. What move do you make in this situation? So first of all, of course, you have to tend to your survival and also threaten checkmate. And now is the time that you cash out the Royal Guard. So I teleport over, I step in, I hide in the corner where miraculously I am safe. Then I move up with the rider, who is really late joining the party, and I kick my claw and have the claw step in to the side there. And at this point, actually, I thought that I had the game won, because there is a way for my opponent to stop checkmate, but because the assassin is not in this hex, I then can win. So I think that my opponent missed this particular sequence of moves and played too passively. Had he put the assassin here, I could have clawed it up to this square and then kicked my claw, but my claw being here does make a little bit of a difference because it allows his pieces to form this wall and step in here. And then his assassin, even from here, is going to be faster reaching my leader than my Brewmaster is able to get over to be able to pull the claw back up and break this wall and somehow get in for checkmate. Him not being able to form this wall is absolutely critical. So if you want, you can pause and see how to save checkmate. There is a way. It's kind of clever. My opponent has to create a window here like this. And now my leader can't step in here because this is an illegal square for my leader to be, because my leader would be putting himself in checkmate. But the fact that the wall is made like this instead of with his own pieces like this means it only takes me one turn to break it. All I have to do is put my rider here, and then the Royal Guard steps in and the rider comes in for checkmate. Now, if his assassin were here, I couldn't do this move, because then the assassin would go here. It would block my rider while also threatening an unstoppable checkmate of manipulator moves. Or I just can't move there, actually, because that is suffocation. But the manipulator can go here, and then the assassin steps in, and if the rider blocks the spot, the manipulator can go there, and the assassin steps in, and there's no running away, because again, the manipulator can go here, and the assassin steps in. So, I don't think there's any way for me to stop the checkmate after my opponent gets the assassin to this spot. But because the assassin is one step away, one very critical step, at this point, it is game over, because my rider can just go in here, and then my opponent is just one hex away from delivering checkmate with the assassin. Now, an interesting thing happened here at the end here. This doesn't really matter too much, but my opponent at this point said good game, and so that made me think for just a little bit to see if there was actually a way to checkmate right now. And there was. See if you can catch it. I wouldn't have thought about it if my opponent hadn't said good game. Now, I don't know if he noticed it. Again, it doesn't matter because I just have an elementary win simply by stepping up with my rider, but there is a way to checkmate this turn. I can claw up my Brewmaster, step this way with the Royal Guard, and then the idea is that after the rider rides in there, the Brewmaster kicks it home for the suffocation checkmate. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and or subscribe, and I'll see you again soon with more games from this tournament. Take care.